Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another podcast. As always, I have very interesting guests, and today is, as always, no exception. Today is a little bit different because I have a parent, a Canadian parent. The confidentiality is going to be turned on for this, just so I can keep this parent's identity under wraps, because there's a lot of parents who have things to say, but they don't want to come out and say it. So this parent today that is joining me, we're going to call her Sarah. She works with Our Duty Canada, and Sarah has been involved in submitting a report to the United Nations in regards to what is happening in our schools. Without further ado, Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David.
So Sarah, tell me a little bit what got you started in this gender ideology and noticing what's been happening in the schools that brought you to this point.
Right. So my experience, like many other, I think, parents' experiences in our country right now, is based on what happened with my own teenage child. Who began to identify as being of the opposite gender at around age 12. So initially, I didn't really think too much of it because I consider myself to be a liberal, sort of left-wing parent and citizen. And so initially my reaction was, well, my child is free to identify however she would like to identify. And if she doesn't want to conform to traditional gender roles, that's okay with me. And so my concern was primarily to support and love my child unconditionally, which is, I think, what all parents want for their children. However, as time went on, I began to see how my child's gender identity was being treated in the schools and then by the medical system. So that was sort of an awakening point for me because it was shocking. I'll give you a specific example of what happened. My child revealed her new gender identity in a school, and it was accepted immediately by all school staff. And the school staff allowed my child to change her name and did not contact me. So this was done behind my back. The new name was taken on by all the teachers, the administration, and the other students. And this went on for weeks before I ever got wind of it. So that was a turning point for me. It's one thing to be open and accepting of a non-conforming child. It's another thing to exclude a parent and keep really important information about a child from a parent. So that was so shocking that I, for the very first time, David sat down at the computer and started doing a little bit of research about policies in the school. To my utter shock, and I mean, this was, when we talk about an awakening moment, this was one of them. To my utter shock, I found a policy in my province, which I won't name the province, but in my province, I found a policy publicly available on the internet that directs schools to not contact parents about a child's gender identity without the permission of the child. I almost threw up in that moment, honestly, because it was just a moment of what is happening in my school, in my province, and in my country. And then I started looking farther and discovered that these policies are everywhere in our country. I was not aware of the policy. I found the date that the policy was passed. We were not notified. There was never a notice that came out from the school or from the province saying, we are passing this policy. This is why we're doing it. We want you to be informed. This was done completely behind closed doors. So when this happened, I became really concerned because I don't believe that it is in the best interest of any child to have parents excluded from important developmental sorts of events, right? Whatever those are. Children always do better when schools and parents are working together. It had never occurred to me that anyone would think something different than that. So I started looking across the country to see, were other parents concerned about this and what were other parents doing? And I found this great organization called Our Duty Canada. And it's an organization um, of parents. We're all parents of children who are experiencing one type or another of identification with the opposite gender, who have been taken in by the school systems, who are being medicalized. And the one thing that attracted me, it made the organization seem attractive to me, is that it is a multi-party organization. This is not a right-wing or a left-wing organization. It is not affiliated with any political parties. In this organization, I've met moms and dads from the entire political spectrum: religious, non-religious, conservative, PPC, NDP, Green Party, Liberal, the whole spectrum. But we all are united by this horror of what's happening with our kids. So that's what brought me to Our Duty Canada. And then when I first came into contact with Our Duty Canada, there was a project that we're going to talk about soon here today, which is a submission to the United Nations that's called a Universal Periodic Review, or UPR. I didn't know what that was, so I'll just give you a brief explanation because I had to learn what it was. So apparently, not apparently, this is fact, every 4.5 years, there is a review of every single member country of the United Nations. And the review is done by all the other members of the United Nations. So all countries review every country one by one, every 4.5 years, to see how is the country doing in terms of human rights, right? What's the human rights record? And then based on what they see, all the member countries make recommendations for improvement. So it's Canada's turn in November to be reviewed by the United Nations in terms of our record on human rights. And that covers everything from children's rights to the rights of minorities, the right to access to health care, the rights of women, is the entire gamut of human rights. So as part of the review, governments and different branches of government can submit reports. But interestingly, civil society organizations can also submit reports. And so Our Duty Canada is a civil society organization, and we wanted to submit this report about what we see happening to children in Canada and what our concerns are. So that's in short, I guess, or maybe in long, what brought me to Our Duty Canada, how I found Our Duty Canada, and how I became involved in writing and submitting this report.
Yeah, I've listened to a podcast with a lady named Erin Friday, who's part of Our Duty, and it seems like Our Duty is not just a Canadian thing. Erin was from California, and she was talking about a very similar experience to yours, where her daughter went to school and started transitioning, and
Yeah.
talking about the psychology of it. She got into a little bit more depth in her story on how basically everything was kind of feeding into this, including the education and the screen time that her daughter was receiving and the friends that she was hanging out with. And this is very concerning to parents because, just like yourself, Erin seemed like a great mom. And once she realized all of this stuff was happening, she had no idea. And one of the scariest things in this, even as a father of two daughters who's into this and knows a lot, because the school has policies like this, even if a parent is involved, once they get a hold of that child, it's very difficult to claw things back and to turn them away. So your
Yeah.
story seems to be very similar to other people in Our Duty Canada as well, and other parents who have kind of expressed the same concerns, pushing their child towards a medical identity.
Right, that's exactly what's happening. So Our Duty is an international organization. I believe it started in the UK, but there are chapters in I know in Canada, in the United States, as you pointed out, in where else? Australia, quite a few chapters around the world, and that really is the sort of connection point for us because we meet online, we have group chats and that kind of thing. And what's really shocking, David, is to see how identical our stories are. No matter what our background, where we are geographically, we have the same story. And some parents were opposed to the new gender identity immediately. Others were not, like me. They're supportive. They love their children, are supportive of gender minority rights, but are shocked by how this is being addressed by schools, and then, as you point out, the medical industry. So that's my next point, and what connects to this UPR support, the review of human rights, is that once the child's identity is sort of solidified by the school, it is very difficult to claw that back. And instead, it becomes like a bit of a runaway horse or train, right? And the next step just becomes unquestionably medical affirming. And what that specifically means, as we outline in the report, is some mix or all of the above: puberty blockers, cross-sex synthetic hormones, and then surgeries to remove healthy body parts or to, add or modify body parts. So these decisions are being made when children are very young and still developing, and they have irreversible consequences. So the parents in Our Duty Canada are horrified that decisions are being made for young children who simply cannot understand the long-term consequences of something like infertility, which is a side effect of some of these treatments. It's a possible side effect. So Our Duty Canada looked into what is the research behind these medical treatments, and we found that the research is very weak. And sometimes there is no evidence supporting. In some studies, there's no evidence. In some studies, there's sort of mixed evidence. And in some studies, there's weak evidence. We discovered, or for me, it was a discovery at least, that independent reviews have been done of the evidence underlying medical transitions. They have been done repeatedly. We found them. We reference them in our report, and those independent studies have found in every single case that there are two major things lacking. Number one, there is no long-term evidence that these treatments are effective. So we don't know, because there have been no long-term studies, we don't know if these medical treatments are even going to help our kids long-term. We don't know if in 10 years they will be happier, less distressed, better adjusted. We have no evidence of that. And number two, we don't have any long-term studies on how much harm may come of these kids who start hormone therapy or surgeries or puberty blockers as children, right? As 15, 14, 12-year-olds. We don't know in 10 years what happens to them. It's because we just don't have those studies. We don't know, are they going to be sterile? We know some of them will. What percentage? We don't know. Under what circumstances? We don't know. Are they going to have, there's a concern about loss of bone density. Are they going to suffer that? How many of them? At what age? What percentage? No idea. Loss of sexual function. Who's that going to affect? At what age? We don't know. So to find out that information is lacking on one hand, and that the treatments are being promoted so aggressively, is just sickening. as a mother, and that's what I'm hearing from other parents as well. Is this the best that we can do for our kids, really? And isn't there some other way to help these children who are in distress? It's not that we're not concerned about our children, but is there not a safer way to help them? So those are our main core concerns, and they're the concerns that led us to write this report.
Yeah, I believe what is happening right now in Canada, definitely, and I think this is a global thing, but specifically talking to Canada, there's this medical abuse going on, and these children are going through a mass experiment. Just even to think that starting the kids on these medical procedures, including just like the puberty blockers, which sterilizes the children, from my understanding, because it stops the the body from maturing like it's supposed to. And it's sold as, oh, once you get off this medication, then it's gonna go back to normal, which is not true. Now, I have procedures, I have uh, book PDFs in binders that go through these risks, and there's a ton of risks. But just
Yep.
the risk alone of having children not being able to have a family when they grow up, I think that's grotesque. I mean, these are the kinds of medications that you would give people who had wronged somebody in society. I'm talking like abusers and whatnot,
Yep.
and you give them to chemically keep them from reproducing. This is the kind of stuff that is given to our children and wrapped up in this empowerment kind of deal. And I think this is medical and political abuse through education, because it seems like if they do it through education, then suddenly it's okay. You start soliciting minors at school on their sexuality, and you start pushing them down this road. And the vulnerable children who who are able to be impressionable as well, they kind of believe this. And even our school, they they say the same thing as you were saying. They wedge a divide between parents and their students, and they paint parents as the ones that can bring harm to children. I mean, we have, as parents, a stakehold. We're the ones that feed our children, we're the ones that teach our children everything, and really the schools are going behind parents' back and doing this. Have you looked in the medication and how easy it is to do these surgeries? And if you
Yes,
have,
I
let me
have.
know what you found out.
Yes. So I think the medical part can vary by province depending on where you are. And what it all comes down to is at what age can the children choose? Well, there are two things happening, I should say. First of all, at what age are children allowed to make their own medical decisions? And just a second, I'm going to turn this off here. And that varies by province. So in Alberta, for example, the age is 18. Parents can object until age 18. After that, it becomes the kid's decision. In other provinces, the law can be that decision can be made as young as 16. So I would be very concerned in those provinces. So once the kid turns 16 or 18 or whatever the age may be, they don't need anyone's permission. And all they need is to tell a doctor or a psychologist. There usually is a requirement of a psychologist letter. That part is true. And again, I want to just be careful about generalizing because I'm recognizing that each province is different and the laws are different. There is in Alberta a requirement of a letter from a psychologist, but there is no specification about how many visits. It could be one visit. Once the kid is over 18, they may not even need to see a psychologist. They may just need to say, I'm transgender and I want these hormones and I want these surgeries. And after, very small time intervals. I've heard some parents say that they get them immediately. I think it varies a lot how stringent. If doctors are being careful, some are very liberal. They can get access to these things immediately. And then the other thing that's happening is that I also know parents in the group who are faced with these really torturous decision to make, because they're being told by doctors that the risk of suicide is so high for transgender kids that parents don't want their kids on these medications, but they feel that they have no choice because they're being told, if you don't agree to this, then you may lose your child. Well, what parent under those circumstances is going to hold up very well, especially if they're not really sure and they're not well informed, which many of us were not. So those are the two sort of paths. The path where the kid gets to do whatever they want with very little. There is absolutely no requirement anywhere in Canada that a child undergo any other type of treatment first to see if maybe something else might help them. There's no requirement that they have to see a psychologist weekly for 2 years. They have this broad language about getting counseling, but we're seeing it play out, and we see that it may be as few as 2 sessions or as few as 5 sessions over 2 years. Well, what kind of support is that? That's not support. That's not intensive therapy. And we also discovered in our research, which you probably also have, that many of these children, more than half of these children, quite a high percentage, have other issues going on. So they have high incidences of depression, anxiety. They may be on the autism spectrum. They may have ADHD. They may have suffered trauma. Many of these kids fall into those categories. And those issues are, to my knowledge, and within this group of parents that I belong to, are never being explored, right? And not only are they not being explored, but we have laws that have been passed in Canada recently that are called anti-conversion laws. And those laws are being used against therapists who might dare to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure that this kid is actually transgender. They're in distress, but I would like some time to see if maybe something else is going on. Well, as our laws currently stand, a bill was recently passed, Bill C6, that says that can be defined as conversion therapy. And the only thing that doctors and psychologists are allowed to do is just affirm the child. Affirm. Well, what if they're wrong? And it's my belief that in a lot of cases, some people think all cases, I think at least a lot of cases, they are wrong. And so the child is not only getting a harmful course of treatment, they're being denied true help for the real issues that are going on. So it's just, I know that I start talking loud when I'm talking about this, but I'm just so shocked that this is actually happening in Canada in 2023 to
That's
our
right.
children.
In Ontario, in order to get top surgery, you just need a nurse to sign off, one nurse. And to get bottom surgery, you need 2 nurses. And this isn't like they have different practitioners. I think there's a nurse practitioner and a registered nurse. It doesn't even matter. It's just a nurse. Whatever nurse you find, they can sign off on this. The bar is so low to get life-altering surgeries that it's baffling that this is legal. You're absolutely right about the affirmation. As a matter of fact, we have organizations that go into the school. First of all, they sell binders which push down the girls' breasts so they can look. They sell packers which girls can put in their underwear to give them a bulge. They sell these funnel cups so girls can stand peeing up. And they go through and they try to give kids this, I'm going to say, take away their direction in life and their identity. It's almost like they could be anything else but themselves. And when I hear this suicide high rate, first of all, I think, if these kids are high suicide, why are you not telling parents? right? You would think that
Very
parents,
good question. That was my first question. Yes.
yeah, you would think that parents should be involved. Second of all, I believe that these schools are participating in causing groups to grow that are at risk of suicide. If these groups of kids are higher risk, then why are these groups growing? Right? You would
Yeah.
think that you want to bring this the that down. And second of all, I think the suicide part comes from all the affirmation. I think what these kids actually need is direction in life. Just to say, hey, it's okay, your body's changing, don't worry, you'll be out in like a few years and then off you go, right? But they take advantage of these vulnerable kids and they just push them through this machine. Now, just imagine for a second, as a parent who is involved with kids, imagine what kids who have no parents are going through. Kids from the foster care or whatnot, these kids are getting absolutely destroyed. So if they can reach kids with strong parents who are involved, then they're definitely taking advantage. And all these things that you found out, sometimes I wonder what is really happening behind those school walls, because I don't
Yeah.
think they're focusing on academics anymore. I think they're putting these kids down a path of self-destruction. When it comes to that suicide, like I said, I've spoken to some people about this, and because of the lack of direction these kids have, they have identity crisis within themselves. So, for example, there was these two girls with other comorbidities that were dating each other. One of them decided to transition,
Yeah.
and it put the other one in a crisis. It's like, well, I thought I was lesbian, I don't know, I'm not straight, I never thought of myself, right? So it put stress on their relationship. Who knows why the other one wanted to transition? Maybe the other one thought, like, it's better to be a boy nowadays, because you hear all these things: toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, and kids
Yeah.
reject that within themselves. They're like, I don't want to be part of that, right?
Exactly.
So then they have
Yeah.
this internal crisis because they don't want to be painted as toxic. So they change genders. There's this turmoil inside them. Then this other girl, she didn't know, now is she straight? She thought she was lesbian. Now she decides to transition as well so she can put her mind at ease. And one of them ended up committing suicide. And it's all because of this turbulence that goes inside their heads, and they have no direction, right? And because
Yeah.
they say follow your heart and all of this, I mean, feelings come and go, right? And if you have no
You're
touch
right.
in reality, yeah, it's not the
And
parents.
adolescence is a really difficult time, and my heart really does ache for these poor kids who are trying to grow up in such a difficult and mixed up world, where the future is, it's a difficult time. And I don't have to list the reasons, that COVID and the environmental crisis that we hear about all the time, and political tensions, and wars and nuclear arms. I mean, it must be, if we just put ourselves in these kids' shoes, it must be extremely difficult to think about your life and your entire future in this world. And that's normal. And it's also very normal for kids to be in a questioning mode during adolescence. And that's why it's even more important, right? The harder, the more difficult the times, and the higher the distress and the stress, the more important it is for doctors and psychologists and schools and parents to present a united front that provides these kids with safety nets and protective guardrails, to say, this is difficult, being adolescent's very hard, harder today than it was when I was an adolescent, but that is why we don't make irreversible decisions at age 12 and 15 and 17. You explore all you want, but here are the limits. Adolescents need those limits, because they may rebel against them, but they need them. because we all know now as adults, looking back to when we were 12, that we are not the same people anymore. And what seemed insurmountable at 12, um, it, or what seemed like really terrible distress and life ending sort of problems, we can see now clearly, right, at age 35, that's not the case. It wasn't that. And thank goodness we had a community around us that didn't let us do something that we would regret. And the fertility piece is really just an excellent example of that. That is irreversible. And no 15-year-old, we talk in the report about informed consent, right? And we object to the notion that any 14 or 12-year-old can provide informed consent for a treatment that may leave them infertile. It's just not possible. No 14-year-old can understand what it might be like at age 35 to want to have a family and to not be able to because of some decision that people let you make at age 14. They can't understand that, so we're supposed to be protecting them, supporting them. I'm not saying ignore the problem, supporting them, providing them all the support and the help that they need, and protecting their developing bodies until they are older and can make these decisions in a more informed way. So the report talks about that. The report essentially, just to summarize it, the report looks at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child, which Canada signed and most UN countries signed. And it looks at all of the provisions of that declaration. And then the report argues that Canada right now is failing to protect the rights of the child. Specifically, we found articles in the declaration that we argue Canada's failing to protect children's rights to be protected from harm. That's one article. And children's rights to attain the maximum level of health that they can. So those are the two rights that we see being violated by these policies that allow kids to medically transition while they're under age 18. So we argue for that. We present the evidence that's out there in medical journals that shows that there is no strong evidence for these recommendations to medically transition, and there's no strong evidence that these treatments are even effective long term. And we also show in our report that other countries, other very progressive countries in the world, like Sweden, like Finland, are turning away. They have made a 180 in recent years, and they are on the record saying, we did our independent reviews, we can't find good evidence for this. And Finland said on the record, this is equivalent to medical experimentation on children. We don't want to allow this anymore. We put all of that in the report, and we also put information about what does informed consent mean. Can a 14-year-old provide informed consent for these treatments? Why can they not? We explore that, and we also explore how informed consent is not possible when parents are not being given all the information, and we are not getting all the information. No one tells parents in the doctor's office, we don't actually know. This is just our best guess right now of what we should do. We don't really know what's going to happen. Parents are not being told that. Parents are not being told that their child may lose sexual function, may lose their fertility. It's being glossed over. And one thing I do want to say about this that I think is really important is that any teenager who sees that everyone else thinks this is a great idea except the parents, well, that teenager is going to think that the parents are the ones who are crazy. That is their perspective. They're children. So schools are authority figures, doctors are authority figures, psychologists are authority figures. And when they see that all those people are treating hormones and puberty blockers like it's no big deal, and there's no risks, and they're totally reversible, when they keep hearing that, and then all of a sudden mom and dad pipe up and say, wait a minute, I've been doing some research and I'm finding some disturbing things. Well, no teenager wants to hear that from mom and dad. So mom and dad, my husband and I, are left out hanging, right? Like the kid is angry with us, um, thinks that we're the ones who are crazy and trying to ruin their happiness. I mean, this is the way I thought when I was a teenager, so I understand that that's the way that they think. But this is the effect, right? This is what happens. This is how these policies and the schools get between parents and their kids, because they're all on board treating it like it's no big deal, right? So of course mom and dad are the stick in the muds trying to ruin the kids. You're ruining my life, and you just don't want to be myself, and worse, you're transphobic. That's also a narrative that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband and I are pushing back and saying it's not anything phobic to ask questions and demand evidence. That is just a minimum responsibility of anyone who is supporting these treatments. That is not phobic of anything or anyone. It's just basic due diligence. But it's really hard when everyone else is affirming and saying, this is no big deal and this is your right and you need to be your true self, and everyone needs to support that, and if they're not, then they're not they don't love you. So that's a pretty scary place to be in as a parent.
Exactly. And we live in a time where just having common sense is
Mm-hmm.
viewed as opposing opinion. I mean, everything you said about this report to me sounds like common sense. I can't believe we have to go out and prove biology, but it just goes to show that, these people can make any claims that they want, not back anything up, and then they're not, no scientific claim, nothing, no biology, nothing reality based, just based on these feelings with irreversible damage, fleeting
Yep.
feelings with permanent decisions.
Yep.
And one of the things that I wanted to ask you was for parents wondering if they might be put in a situation like yourself. I mean, first of all, if your kids are going to school, your kids are going to be taught this.
Yep.
What are the red flags that you've seen at the beginning that kind of triggered you to say, hold up, something's happening here?
Right. Okay. So if I had to do it over, this is a question that I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about. What would I tell? Because our work in Our Duty Canada is to support parents. That's our main work. So this is exactly the kind of question that we're trying to answer. We're trying to come up with resources. We're talking about. So a couple of things that definitely are on the radar. So as I said to you earlier, it's just really uncanny to see how similar all the stories of these kids are. They're just so similar. So the very first red flag is when your kid comes to you and says they think they might be non-binary. That's a red flag. That's the beginning of a process that almost always turns out to be a progression into transgender. So that would be one step where in my mistake was to say, well, okay, that's fine, right? If your kid says that, it's time to sit down with them to figure out where that's coming from. And I can guarantee you it's coming from one of two places. It's coming from school and it's coming from the internet. Those are where they're coming from. So sit down with the child, ask where it's coming from, try to get as much information about what's going on, and start pushing back right then. So the non-binary question, certainly, if I had to do it over again, one of my own failings was not sufficient supervision of the internet. I was completely naive about what's out there, and that is another flag. So you need to know exactly what your kids are watching on the internet. I would watch out for things like I would not watch out for, David. I would be more aggressive about meeting with teachers at the beginning of the year. Whoever your child's teacher is, meet with that teacher and ask them specifically what gender content is going to be presented during the school year, when and how, so that you have that information. I was quite shocked to see at the beginning of the year a Scholastic handout come home, where you can order books for your children, an entire section dedicated to transgender content in Scholastic. These are the things that are red flags. Um, and to empower parents to feel confident in their argument that we can teach tolerance and respect, which we must, without pushing children down this road, right? It's okay to teach tolerance and respect, and I think that's what a lot of parents think is happening. And as you pointed out earlier, teenagers who have such good hearts, right? They don't want to be associated with intolerance. They want to be tolerant. They want to be respectful. And how wonderful that we cultivate that. It's one thing to cultivate that, but that does not equate asking every single child on a yearly basis, are you a boy or a girl? What are your preferred pronouns? What name would you like us to call you? We won't tell your parents if you don't want us to. Okay, one does not equate the other. And parents will be told that it's one and the same. It's not one and the same. You can stand up and say, I support tolerance and respect. I do not support this active agenda in my child's classroom. So find out, speak back, talk back, keep your kid home on certain days if you want to. And try to educate your kids about what's going on and what your own values are, and what the potential harms are, right? Those would be the red flags as far as I'm concerned. It starts as the schools, it's the internet, and boy, if your child comes to you and says, I'm non-binary, or even says the word gender identity, you need to just sit down and not just think, oh, well, this is okay, and it'll pass, or you need to have a conversation with that child and keep digging.
Absolutely. I think these are great points. I just want to reinforce that point you made with the child coming home stating they're non-binary. For all the viewers and listeners, I had a podcast with John Uhler, who worked with survivors of sexual trauma and also with predators. And he was talking about this gender ideology. He said, if your child comes home and says they're non-binary, that's a red flag that somebody has sunk their teeth into them, and it's probably at school. And I do want to encourage parents, don't worry about these labels that they say, transphobic, all of these. A phobia is an irrational fear of something, and an opinion is not a phobia. Just because you believe that your child is the way they're born, they're not born into the wrong body. I think it's abusive to tell a child, can you imagine, hey, Johnny, you're born in the wrong body, you should be a girl. That's abusive behavior.
That's horrifying. Yeah.
And I think the way to accept children, if we're really talking about acceptance, accept the child as they are, and don't be afraid to just say what you believe, right? At the end of the day, like, I talk with my daughters and I say, look, I got a beard, whatnot. Do you think I can ever turn into a girl? No, you can't. Well, I got longer hair too. Am I a girl? No. And I tell them just simple things because my daughters are a little bit younger. My youngest is 8 years old. And I say, every single person on this planet, every single one, without a doubt, everyone that's living now, everyone that lived before, was born from a woman. No man, no matter how much they try, can ever turn into a woman, right? And so I'm teaching them early from that.
Yeah.
And I know I'm on top of it. I really want to encourage parents, you got to participate in your own rescue with this. You have to participate, and you can't feel bad for being a parent. And take your children off the screen. And if you reduce their screen time, I know you think it's like an easy way out, distractions for them. They learn from what they see. And if you take them off the screen, yes, you're going to have to be a parent and be involved, right? Figure out some activities. Go outside, Get them exhausted doing an activity, get them playing with friends, get them social, get them off the screens, whether it's computers, TVs. I don't have a TV at my house. I'm always outside. I have to fill up my girls' time somehow. And this
Yeah.
is the way I do it.
The way I do it.
And I think it's
And I think it's
very important that
very
you
important
sent that you're giving these red flags just so parents can have an idea if their child is
Yeah.
going through this.
Yeah. It's very it's shocking how quickly it can happen and how much of it happens behind your back, even when you are. I mean, I'm with my children every day. You know, I parent every day, hours a day I spend with my children, and still somehow this happened. So it's I mean, we don't want to over alarm people, but on the other hand, I think parents do need to be more vigilant just because the stakes are so high, so high, especially when this medicalization starts. So we're hoping that the report that we submitted it to the United Nations. It'll be reviewed in November by other countries. And then there will be recommendations that come from that by other countries. We're hoping it will have an impact, but even if it doesn't at that level right now, it's exactly what you said earlier. You know, it's about just raising awareness. We have it on our website. I would encourage people to go to our website. If you're a parent, check out our website. Consider joining if you feel like you need support. And there also are some resources on the website. So recommendations just like the ones that you just gave about spending time outside, getting your kids off the screen. We have a list of recommendations in a document called Resources for Parents. So check that out and feel free to reach out to us. And we're happy to provide any kind of support that we can. I can say I've met some just amazing women and men across the country through this group, some really concerned and caring parents, just amazing human beings that are involved because we care, not just about our own kids, but about everyone's children. So please reach out. You know, go to Our Duty Canada and reach out to us.
Yeah, it's very important that parents have a way to deal with this and that there's a group of people, like-minded people, fighting for the same thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, as you said, Sarah, one of the things is they've been downplaying what they're doing. So I'm not really that afraid of bringing awareness because what is happening is massive,
Yes,
government
it is.
funded, and I don't want any parents to get the illusion that, you know, this can't happen to them because even like yourself, a parent who is involved, now you have to deal with this. And
Yeah.
I'm sure for you, just dealing with it right now is extremely painful.
It is. It's traumatic. It's absolutely the worst trauma I've ever been through, hands down, hands down. So the group has been super helpful to me, meeting other parents going through this, and I agree with what you say. I don't like to alarm people, but on the other hand, I don't want to downplay it either. It's what's going on is massive. It really is massive. It's not just a fringe sort of movement. It's throughout the school curriculum, and it's having some definitely some unwanted consequences on some of our kids. So it's better to be aware, and it's better to know in advance the kinds of things you can do to protect your kids. And I like what you said about just basic education with the kids, talking to your kids, and also letting them know that whether they're born a girl or a boy, they can be whoever they want to be. It doesn't mean they have to act, dress any specific way. Um, they can be and present however they like, but under no circumstance is there a justification for cutting up and mutilating your body in order to fit some stereotype, which is what it comes down to. Instead of moving away, these kids think they're moving away from stereotypes. They think that they're defying stereotypes. They're not. It's the opposite that's happening. They're saying, I identify as this gender, therefore I have to take drugs for the rest of my life. I have to surgically alter my body. Any movement that promotes that kind of harm, there's something wrong, right? You should never, to be yourself, should never require lifelong drugs. And I don't know if I mentioned, but these drugs, these hormones, this is for the rest of their lives. This is not a 1-year course of hormones. This is for the rest of their lives. And the surgeries are irreversible and the effects are irreversible. How is it even common sense that any beautiful, healthy child needs that kind of intervention to be happy? That it just does not pass the common sense test. In what other circumstance would we give these kinds of risky drugs to kids in the name of happiness?
That's right. Not even to mention the fact that there's a risk for infections, reoccurring infections, other
Absolutely.
surgeries, all these things.
Lifelong medical patients is what they become.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
horrible. Before we wrap things up, Sarah, is there something that you wanted to mention that you feel we have not covered in this?
There's one more thing that I would like to say. Other than we did talk a little bit about just becoming informed, right? Taking time to become informed. We tend to be very trusting of our institutions here in Canada because Canada is a wonderful country with many strengths. And we have always, as Canadians, been proud of our schools and our medical system, right, as being strong institutions. So it's left Canadian parents in a vulnerable situation where they're overly trusting. I'm going to speak about myself here as one example. Overly trusting that everything's in good hands and nothing is going off the rails. Well, that is what's happening. So parents have to be, I think, more. Without being paranoid, but a little more suspicious than perhaps Canadian parents are used to being, and just really becoming informed, talking to each other, looking at the policies in the schools, and talking to teachers about what's being taught specifically. And the other thing, the last thing that I want to say, I want to talk about the feeling of shame that a lot of parents feel when their kids get sort of sucked into this harmful belief system or movement or whatever people call it, different things. But one of the main barriers that a lot of parents have in coming forward and then speaking out is shame, right? Because parents feel that if their child got caught up in this under their watch, that must mean that they're a bad parent. What kind of parent would allow their children or would not be able to protect their children from this, right? So we hear that from parents a lot. So I just want to recognize that and and just put it out there that parents, even the best parents in the world, are just a piece or a very important piece of the child's life, but the influences on that child are much more extensive than just the parent. And we can't control everything that the child is exposed to. We are human. We trust too much sometimes, and things happen. So don't let your sense of shame keep you from reaching out to connect with other people, because together we're much stronger. And it's really important that we come together and push back together. So I just wanted to mention that because we do hear that in it, and I can also identify with that. And I know how hard it is to come out and say, "Oof, look what's happened under my watch." That's how we see it. So don't let that stop you from reaching out and finding ways to work with other parents to push back to hopefully improve things over the next few years for our kids and leave them in a more protected environment.
Absolutely. And push back we must.
Yes,
And
we must.
thank you so much for coming on and talking to me, Sarah. And I just want to encourage all the other parents. If you found that this was resonating with you, I'm going to leave a link in the YouTube description for Our Duty Canada. Reach out to them and become part of a group. There's lots of groups out there, and This is the second time I'm having somebody from Our Duty Canada come and speak to me. I think podcast episode number 4, if I recall off the top of my head, I also had Karen from Our Duty Canada talk about the schools and kind of how it works with the political items. So I want to encourage all the parents, just be active in your kids' life. I want to thank Sarah for coming on. And please share the video so other parents become aware. You never know what strikes a chord with somebody, and then more parents are going to be aware of this. These videos are pretty censored, as you can imagine, just because of the nature of discussions, but that's not going to stop any of us from speaking out. So I encourage everybody to share this. And if you enjoy this content, as always, please subscribe. And until next time, take care.
Thank you. Take care.